And my watch says 10. So, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. And welcome to the League of Women Voters sponsored Colorado Assembly Legislative Update, which I had to say a few times to make sure I didn't trip over that.
I couldn't say it.
Joining us this morning, our Assembly elected officials, Senator Cleave Simpson and Representative Barbara MacLachlan. So thank you both for being with us in person. We had a funny email exchange, I don't know, a number of weeks ago, and we're like, okay, fingers crossed that schedules and weather are going to work out. So thank you for that. Okay. I also just want to recognize that we have some other elected officials with us this morning. And most of you are sitting in the back, I think. Could I just ask if you are an elected official, please stand and let us know that you're here. Yeah. So. Well, thank you all very much for coming. So I'm Lori Meininger. I have the privilege of being the current president of the La Plata League chapter of the League of Women Voters. And this morning's meeting is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters in La Plata County and Montezuma County. So I want to thank some of our fellow League of Women Voters members who've come from other chapters to be here this morning. It is a hybrid meeting. So obviously we are live in this room, but we also have, I've got a lot louder all of a sudden, have folks joining us from throughout the 6th Senate and 59th House districts via live stream. The meeting is being recorded, so it will be available for online viewing after this meeting. As we begin this morning's program, let us begin by acknowledging that this land upon which we are meeting, living and working in La Plata County, was taken from the original native inhabitants and is the ancestral and ceremonial land of the Ute, Apache, Pueblo, Hopi, and Diné nations. It is important that we recognize and acknowledge the original land stewards who continue to inhabit and connect with this land of Southwest Colorado. So thank you for your attention and respect in acknowledging this important legacy. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties, and our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. To do that, we actively encourage the informed and active participation, of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education, advocacy, and where necessary, litigation. Participating in and hosting voter and community educations like our program this morning is just one of the many activities the League engages in to accomplish our mission. So before we hear from our elected officials, bear with us for just a little bit of housekeeping. So as I mentioned, the legislative update is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing following today's event. So the program may not be recorded without the express permission of the League of Women Voters, and no excerpts may be used in any form by individuals, candidates, officials, or political parties. And just a note about the format. So our time together will be town hall style, and we will take questions from our in-person audience after Senator Simpson and Representative MacLachlan have had an opportunity to brief us on the work they are engaged in. And I think we're just about at the halfway point in this session. So if you would like to ask a question, as I mentioned, please, there are some slips of paper. Please take a few minutes while you're listening, write down your question. If you have one that hasn't been collected, feel free to wave it up, and our greeters will collect those from you so that we can ask those at the end of their time. A note about decorum for this morning's meeting. To promote civil discourse and democratic engagement, we expect that all participants in person and online to be courteous and participate with respect for each other and our elected officials. The League of Women Voters recognizes that sometimes passions run deep on issues that are important to us. to ensure that all members of the public have equitable access to the democratic process, and so that all feel free to participate. Respect and courtesy are required. Please, no clapping, jeering, booing, you know. And lastly, if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to double check that your phone is turned off or at least in silent mode. You really don't want your ringtone to be on our recording. All right, so let's turn our attention to Senator Simpson and Representative MacLachlan. Their combined districts, Senate District 6 and House District 59, cover 14 counties in Southwest Colorado, all the way from Alamosa to Montrose and Montezuma to Hinsdale counties. With a population of over 150,000 residents, our geography is as diverse as our people, our needs, and our opinions. So let me introduce our candidates. Senator Simpson was born and raised in Alamosa, where he still lives, and is a Colorado School of Mines graduate. He was elected to the Colorado Senate in November of 2020, representing Senate District 35. Redistricting afforded him the opportunity to now represent Senate District 6. Senator Simpson spent almost 2 decades working in the surface coal mining business in Texas and Australia, and he has been active in farming and ranching for 30 years and is the 4th generation of his family to make the San Luis Valley home. He has served the Rio Grande Water Conservation District as their general manager and has served on the board of trustees for Adams State University, including 2 years as chairman of the board. In the Senate, he serves on the Legislative Council and the Capital Development, Transportation and Energy, Finance, and Agriculture and Natural Resources Committees. No wonder you're busy. Representative MacLachlan is a 4th generation Coloradan. She was born in Lakewood and lives in Durango, where she has raised her family. She received a bachelor's degree in journalism from Colorado State, a bachelor's degree in English from Fort Lewis College, a master's degree in learning and teaching from Regis University, and a certificate in college counseling from UCLA. She is a former journalist for the Durango Herald and has taught English and journalism at Durango High School for 20 years. Representative MacLachlan was first elected to the Colorado House of Representatives in 2016 and re-elected to the House in 2020. She is the chair of the House Education Committee, vice chair of the Joint Water Resources and Agriculture Review Committee, and serves on the House Agriculture, Water, and Natural Resources Committee. We are clearly represented by people of long-standing interest and service to the state of Colorado. So thank you again for joining us today. All right, so I'll turn the program over to the two of you. So as we talked about, an opportunity, as you know, to just let all of us know what's going on in the session up in Denver, what you're working on, what are the bills of importance, and what's left to be done in the second half of the session. So we will keep it informal. And following your updates, we'll open it up to questions and answers from the audience. So I'm going to ask you to keep your remarks to about 15 minutes each, so that we have plenty of time for you to engage with the elected. So Senator, we'll begin with you.
So if my mic is on, I hope you all can hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be in Durango this morning. Again, being born and raised in Alamosa, spent time coming to Durango as a kid, and then really for about a 20-year period, I hadn't been back here till about 2016. Was really just astonished about how much Durango had grown since the last time I was here. So it's always a pleasure to be here. I get to come back routinely to talk about water in this basin. Have great connections with the Southwest Water Conservation District. There are only 4 water conservation, excuse me, 4 water conservation districts in the state: the Rio Grande, the Southwest, the Colorado, and the Republican. There are lots of conservancy districts, but there are really only 4 conservation districts. So anyway, pleasure to be here this morning. Talk a little bit about, Lori did a great job of saying everything I was going to say about 4th generation. I'm born and raised in Alamosa, I still farm and ranch. Today, I have a 31-year-old son who really manages my farm and cattle operation for me in my absence. So that's the 5th generation. And I now have a 2-year-old grandson and about a 2-week-old granddaughter. That if we take care of this place and be really thoughtful about how Colorado grows, there'll be a 5th and 6th generation of the Simpson family in the San Luis Valley. So that's a lot of what motivates me. I will talk just briefly about, again, why I ran for office. I never ran for any other really elected position. I was on Farm Services Agency's county committee in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I ran for and was appointed to the mosquito control district in Alamosa. But outside of that, my appointment to the Adams State Board of Trustees was very enlightening and an honor to serve there. This wasn't in my forte to be in public office, particularly at the state legislature. But I really, from that water perspective, at the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, I served on the local roundtable there and then was selected from the roundtable to represent that basin at a state level on something called the Interbasin Compact Committee, where representatives from every basin across the state meet a few times a year to talk about the water challenges in the state. And it was really, again, I mean, everybody has an appreciation and understands how challenging this aridification of the West is becoming, and the ever increasing demand growing nearly exponentially and the supply dwindling nearly exponentially. It just sets up a really precarious set of conditions from my perspective of how Colorado deals with this change in water. And it was really what motivated me, but it was really about representing rural Colorado. When I got elected to Senate District 35, it was 16 counties, the San Luis Valley, and everything east to Kansas. They're all dominated by rural communities, irrigated agriculture. And that really just set the stage for me to really be inspired and want to step up and run and represent rural Colorado. And so it's kind of morphed into certainly more than just water and agriculture. I'll highlight, because some of the bills I'm doing this year and the ones I've done in the last couple of years, ironically end up in the health and human services space, and particularly around behavioral health. Like, I don't have any expertise in behavioral health, but it didn't take long to recognize and learn more about the challenges, particularly in rural Colorado, around the disproportionate rate of suicides, death by overdose, families impacted by opioids. The rates in rural Colorado, particularly in Senate District 35, were just disproportionately higher than the urban counterparts. And that coupled with, I got assigned to Health and Human Services. A little story, I get elected in 2020, 2021, you go to your leadership in the party, and I'm a Republican. I go to the Republican leadership and say, all right, I know ag and water, so I should be on ag and water. I served on the Board of Trustees at Adams State, so I could be on education. I have a background in mining and energy. I could probably be on energy board. All right, you're assigned to Health and Human Services and Veterans Affairs. I said, all right, well, I am a veteran, so that kind of fit a little bit. Anyway, it put me in this unique spot, though, about casually understanding the challenges in particularly the behavioral health space, but healthcare very generally. And look, I had some eye-opening experiences my first year on the committee. And again, I'll take a step backwards and go, when I got assigned to Health and Human Services, I called my predecessor, who was Senator Larry Crowder. He happens to live in Alamosa as well, and he's neighbors with my grandparents. But anyway, I called Larry. I said, Larry, I got put on Health and Human Services. I don't know anything in that space at all. And he said, relax. He said, I got assigned to it as well. I didn't know anything about it. He said it was by far the most rewarding committee I ever served on. So I took that to heart, really kind of dig in, and again, understanding the challenges around behavioral health in rural parts of the state, and then understanding how impactful it is across the whole state, really set me on a path to be more engaged and involved in trying to learn about the healthcare system, and in particular the behavioral health system. One of the first bills I ran with another brand new Senator Kolker from Centennial was the establishment of the 988 suicide hotline. And I'm like, but what an opportunity for a brand new legislator to be involved in what, markedly may have been the most important piece of legislation I will ever run here, and the impacts that it can have on people's lives. So, but it grew above and beyond that. Sponsor of creating the Behavioral Health Administration, again, serving on a task force, set aside $500 million to transform the behavioral health system in Colorado. And I don't want to oversimplify it too much, but as an outsider looking in, Colorado does not do a very good job in the behavioral health space at all. We don't have enough facility space. We don't have enough bed space to treat people. We don't have enough workforce. If you had the bed spaces, we don't have enough workforce to provide the services that we need. And then lastly, for me, we don't do a good job of preventative care in that space. So you could take $500 million and plug it into any three of those, and I think be impactful. But it, again, has set me, on some parallel paths. Certainly agriculture and water are still first and foremost for me, but I've kind of stepped into this behavioral health space to get more engaged there. So even this session, matter of fact, Thursday night was a long, lengthy, well, let me take a step back. It was last week, because yesterday the governor signed his first official bill signing ceremony. Was a bill I sponsored along with Senate President Fenberg around psychologists, and the psychologists, under very strict guidelines, psychologists given the ability to write prescriptions. There are many other states that already do this, and it was got engaged in this conversation over a year ago, and finally got the bill crafted, went through the House and the Senate, and we finished it up last week, and then the governor signed it yesterday. So I was really proud of that accomplishment. Again, it was for me about again, I end up focusing in rural Colorado, but accessibility to any number of services, and that was an opportunity to improve access and outcomes for people in rural Colorado. So I'm going to just read off, each of us, because we operate on something called the gavel amendment, each of us are allowed to introduce 5 bills. So I have at least 5 Senate bills that I'm a prime sponsor on. And keep in mind, there are only 35 senators and 65 House representatives, but I can be on as many of those House representative bills as I can afford to take on. So you end up with way more than 5 bills. But I was just going to read through quickly what bills I'm on this year and what we're working on. And actually, at least one of them is with Representative MacLachlan as well. The task force on high altitude water storage is a bill. And there's a backstory there, but she and I are on that. I'm active in watershed restoration and health projects, so a timber industry incentive. For the first time this year, I actually stepped off into the criminal justice system space as well. For me, that was again something, I don't know, overrun my time. I'm on the Capital Development Committee, which reviews assets across the state. So last summer, I'm at a women's correctional facility in Denver, a prison system. I'm 60 years old. I've never even been in my county jail before. And so, I mean, that's interesting. I would never admit to it anyway. But it highlights again, as a legislator, the responsibility to be engaged and thoughtful and learn about all the issues that, ultimately this is a very binary choice for the both of us. You have to vote yes or no at some point in time. So I'm trying to be educated, but I was going to highlight one I was very, very proud of was measures to expand post-conviction DNA testing. And that was really one of the most emotional testimonies I'd been involved in a couple of years, about a gentleman who had been sentenced to death row in Arizona. And because of a policy that we adopted, it afforded him an opportunity for some post-conviction DNA testing that proved he was innocent and actually identified the real perpetrator who was in jail. So Colorado, we got that passed through. This one will prohibit wagering on simulcast greyhound races, licensed psychologist prescription authority, rural county and municipality energy efficiency building codes, modernize processes to obtain water well information, modification of rural county officer salary categories, ag products inspection cash fund reserve, This one hits close to home here in La Plata County. Closed landfills remediation, local governments grants, water quality data standards, the water projects eligibility list, Medicaid reimbursement for community health services, water resources and ag review committee that Representative MacLachlan and I both serve on, out of state, online retail vehicle purchases, wildfire detection technology pilot program, eligibility for agricultural future loan program, advanced industry accelerator programs, physician assistant collaboration requirements, and lastly, I'll highlight one other one, not quite lastly for me, but an interesting one, agricultural producers' use of agrivoltaics. So I know there's some few folks that are very interested in that space. And then the last one that's actually a bill I've agreed to that's not been introduced yet, but really, again, touches a chord with me, is concerning measures to improve outcomes for young children by replacing justice involvement with community-based services. So in Colorado right now, children as young as 10 years old can become part of the criminal justice system. They can be charged and held in jail. This is an effort to say that's too young, that there should be different paths for children 10 to 13. And then at 13, that's where the criminal justice system potentially could be involved. So you can tell by some of the titles, I'm not hesitant to get involved in controversial bills. They're always ones that I check my conscience first and what is good for the constituents, particularly in Senate District 6, but all of Colorado. So I don't hesitate to jump in those. I always work really collaboratively on all my bills. They always have Democratic sponsorship as well, and likewise all those the first half of the bills were House bills that predominantly House Democrats have reached out to me to be a Senate prime sponsor on the bill. So a little bit of what I'm working on. Again, it's like healthcare, it's ag, it's water, it's forest health. I'm always interested in standing up veterans issues as well. That's a whole nother conversation. But higher education, I meet with President Striticus routinely, President at Adams State, David Tanberg. That's always an interest to me. Again, having served on the board of trustees there, I have a great appreciation for the challenges in higher ed, particularly in rural parts of the state. So I probably went past my 15 minutes.
Actually, just right on time.
Right on time. Thank you.
Thanks. So, but now I'm exhausted just listening to all your work. I don't know what's going on. I'm Barbara MacLachlan. I'm in my 7th year serving as your House District 59. And this year, last term I had 6 counties and now I have 4. And although I miss the counties that I lost, I did just read the other day that Red Mountain Pass is considered only the 2nd most dangerous road in America right now. So I'm like, okay, if I don't have to drive over that in the winter, I was probably okay with it. Not driving on Red Mountain Pass for winters anymore. I'm really happy about that. My votes tend to be first for District 59, then for rural Colorado, and then for my party. I end up voting against my party often enough if they are. We run into a lot of bills that are kind of, sometimes they're Denver centric, but sometimes they're bills that don't really have anything to do with us down here, and it would almost hurt us here. So I try not to vote for those, even though it used to be that you would vote for the bill if you really liked the person running it, and that doesn't work. You have to kind of vote on the policy. And people know that, but they don't do it very often. So I'm really just taking a real strong stance on that this year. We also have a year that our fiscal balance is very low. So I've killed a few bills that are just too costly. I had one bill that came out with a $5 million fiscal note on it. That's we have fiscal analysts who look at the bill and tell you about how much it's going to cost the state. And I took it down to 0, so I was happy with that. Saved a couple $1 million on that one. But that's a stretch to really have these great ideas, but if they're costing a lot of money, this is not the year to do them. So we're really focusing on killing bills that don't fit. We have a very limited budget, and we have a balanced budget, which is great in Colorado. and it's in the Constitution, so we have to have a balanced budget. But that means that if you take off from one area, you have to add to another, you have to decide where to subtract the money, and that's harder than it seems. The Senate is going into their, what we call the long bill, and you'll never guess why they call it the long bill. It's because it's really long. There's just no Mr. Long behind it or Mrs. Long. It's just a very long bill. But that is the state budget that we end up looking at very, very closely. And it starts in the Senate this year, and they will be looking at that at the end of March and making amendments and seeing what they can add to it and, you know, where we need to move money. And then it comes to the House. And so we look at all the amendments that the Senate put on it. We might add our own. We might disagree with some of their amendments. So by the end of those 2 weeks, we have done nothing but budget to see where our money is going, where it should be going, what we have extra, and we have to make sure it balances. And we have to do that at home in our budgets, of course, but it's very different at the state level. It's the numbers, the needs are so huge, and we can't just say, oh, let's just add more money. You know, if I'm desperate at home, I can get a second job if I need to fill in the gaps, and we can't do that in Colorado. There's no extra source of money that we can dig into later. So there's that. I've been chair of the House Education Committee since my 3rd year in. And so I take that role very seriously. We are not paying our teachers enough, and we all know that. And it's really hard to find the money every year to get that money to pay teachers, but it is not for lack of trying. That's what Democrats and Republicans are doing. It's not a party deal. Everybody is trying to find that money. So that's always a big issue. We also have the problem in education of that we have a very drastic teacher shortage. And so we've passed some good bills this year. One of them was we have a compact with other states, and if other states have teachers who are certified there, they can come to Colorado, and Colorado determines whether they would fit in. So they don't have to go back to school when they come to Colorado. It's really good for like military families who one person might move here and the spouse is a teacher, and now we can bring that teacher in to work right away. We don't have to have them go back to school, because oftentimes they just don't want to go back to school to try this all over. So that's moving through the legislature right now. I think it has a pretty good chance of winning. So we try a lot of bills to get more more teachers into the system. I'm really lucky to get to work with Senator Simpson because especially in the ag world, we have a lot in common. We are both on our ag committees, me in the House and him in the Senate, and we are both on the water committee. And so we get to do a lot of bills with each other, for each other, and I would say for all of Colorado. For the first time ever, Colorado has put water as one of its top 3 issues that we need to really be considerate of this year. Kind of at about time, but it took a lot of rural representatives to really make a stink about it and to say this is so important. If you live in Denver, you turn on the tap and you don't know where your water comes from, and nobody really cares where it comes from. But if you live down here, it's absolute urgent that we understand where our water comes from, how it's stored, where it's going, the value of it. The Colorado River, everything has to do with water in primarily rural Colorado, but western and southern Colorado, it's huge. Denver's been trying to take water out of the San Luis Valley because they need it for their lawns. And I'm like, what about all of our agriculture down there? So it's a fight that we have to put on, but there's not that many of us. So we just have to be pretty loud as rural representatives to say, you're not taking our water. And the Western Slope has to support Southern Colorado and Eastern Colorado, where most of our rural representatives are. And we work really well together, I think, Democrat and Republican in rural Colorado, because we have to and we want to. And to me, that's pretty essential. He did bring up one bill about storage that we came up with. Our interim committees come up with bills to run, and then we take those to the legislature to run. So one of our big bills was storage of water in mountains. And we thought, instead of building dams, let's see how we can, a study to storage. Unfortunately, I was running that bill with Hugh McKean, a really fabulous representative who passed away last year. And he was so excited at our committee to say, I've got this bill, and we signed on to it. And he goes, after the election, I'll tell you all about it, but it's really going to be great. And he died before the election. And according to law, we can't look at any of his notes. So we didn't know what it was. So Representative Catlin and I, who's in the neighboring district to us, he's from Montrose, we're going to try to revive that next year and see what we can do to do a study, because we just couldn't get any of the notes. We didn't know what Hugh was so excited about. So, but we miss him terribly, but I had a few bills like that this year. So I'm sorry, it's not going to be going anywhere. So we did extend one of our bills, extended the Water Resource Committee. So it is an interim committee, meaning that after we get out of this session, we go to work in the summer and we travel around and take field trips to water so we can see what's going on in Colorado and understand it. This bill will make it a year-long bill so that if water issues come up, we can address it immediately instead of waiting until June to address water issues. There's no fiscal note with it because we're going to take the same money and stretch it out over a year instead of doubling the amount of money that we would need for it. So, so that worked for all of us, and we hope it passes. Passed out of House, I think it's so.
Out of the Senate.
Out of Senate, and we passed it in the House. Yeah, we passed it in my committee. So I'm on that bill. So it has to go to appropriations. But I think it's a really good bill for all of us that we can talk about water all the time. If it's going to be an essential part of the district and what we're talking about, we have to make sure that we show and not just say, you know, we don't want to tell. So many of my first few bills have come out of talking to local residents. So one of them is about staff sabbaticals at Fort Lewis and all schools of higher education. In statute, professors can take sabbaticals, and that law came into place because a few years ago, some professor somewhere blurted out, he goes, oh, I can take a sabbatical and then take my family on vacation to Hawaii. And everybody goes, yeah, we kind of like more out of a sabbatical than that. So they wrote a law, I don't know when this was, but that says, oh no, you have to like do the research and you have to bring it back and it has to be good for the school. You have to be able to bring it to your department, to your classes, school. And so a lot of people said, well, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound like a trip to Hawaii to me. So, so it did put a lot of guardrails on it. This one lets specific staff members also do the same. We have staff members who are running pretty incredible student-centered programs at colleges now. And so when this bill passes, they will have the opportunity to also take the sabbaticals under the same strict stipulations. They have to bring it back. They have to fill out forms. They have to, if they're going to do study, how will it make students better? How will it make the school better? How will it make departments better? And it's completely up to the schools whether they want to do it or not. So we are not telling them they have to, or that they have to spend money on it. If they don't have the money, they can say no. They don't have to do anything. But it was much more inclusive. And I had several staff members from Fort Lewis bring that to me to say, let's try it. So they testified. It passed unanimously in the House, and I think it's on to the Senate now. So, so I think that's a pretty good one. We are both doing the closed landfill remediation, and the curse of presenting bills is when somebody says this is going to be an easy bill. Because as soon as you say easy bill, it blows up on you. So this bill was about landfills and let's keep them clean and keep our water clean. And they were closed years ago, and the state changed its statute about what you need to do with a closed landfill. And suddenly La Plata County was out of compliance, and they didn't do anything to come out of compliance. They just, the law, standards were changed. But we do need to keep up with it. But the state was charging them money, and then they couldn't afford to fix it because they were paying the state money. So we're trying to work this out. 100% of counties in Colorado support the bill. So everybody thought it was easy, but as my county commissioners will nod in agreement, it's not an easy bill after all. So we're working a lot on that. We're doing a lot of stakeholding work and trying to get all that going. So I get to meet with them afterwards to talk about landfills. I never thought I'd be talking about landfills, but here we are. I did run a bill with Representative Catlin next door, and traditionally in Colorado, you can make advance payments on only a few things. And if you want to pay somebody to be doing something, you're paying an outside agency or a government-sponsored agency could pay another one. There's limits on who you can make advance payments to. This makes sure that farmers and anybody in agriculture industry can get advance payments from our food bank system, so that the farmers will know what to produce. The food banks will know that they're getting the money for it. And so it's really good for the growers, because they will know that they have a market already for it. They've signed contracts and they're prepaid for it, so they have the money to actually do it. And it also helps the state keep track of where the hunger needs are in Colorado. So we think it's a really good bill. It did pass through the House, and it's going to the Senate now. Last year I had somebody approach me about wanted $5 million to put cameras on school buses, so that they can catch people going through, the stop arms and breaking the law. And as it turned out, this person wanted $5 million, but only $2 million was going to go to schools, and then his company was going to keep $3 million. I thought, oh, that's a bad idea. So we killed that one. And I had brought back a bill that all the money will go just to schools who want it. And we're going to try to put cameras on the stop arms of buses. Because normally if a car runs through that arm, when the bus is out, which happens frequently, the bus driver is supposed to write down the color of the vehicle, the time, the license plate, and he's taking care of kids. I think the kids should come first on this one. So now it'll be on camera, and when he gets to the end, or he or she gets to the end of the line, then they can write down the time and place. And so right now we're working out the fiscal note for that. How do we get this paid for without breaking the backs of schools or police? And who should be in charge of, determining who gets the ticket and how they get the ticket and stuff. So we're trying to keep the fiscal note down with that too. So we're doing a lot of stakeholder meetings on that. I just got a bill that passed out of the Senate fairly unanimously. I think they only lost by 2 votes. And it's the definition of serious bodily injury, which sounds like a really weird bill to be on. The police asked me to be on it. I'm running it with a Republican who is a former policeman. Right now, if somebody stabs or shoots you and the bullet or knife actually penetrates your skin and they forget to kill you, it didn't hit anything that was really serious on you, they can get a ticket, but no more. So you're lucky that you lived through it, but what a silly law that seems like to me. So this just changes it a little bit to say, if the knife or bullet penetrates you, it's all considered serious bodily injury. And it shouldn't have to be that you die or that they've hit a bad organ. They attempted to kill you or hurt you seriously. And so this just changes that a little bit, but it has full support of police and district attorneys, because people are almost dying, or they have the fear of dying out there, but they're not. So somebody gets let off the hook. And I think that's pretty unreasonable. And then the last one we're working on, well, one of the last ones is it's local funding for access to state-owned recreational areas. And this came from the county commissioners in Pagosa Springs and Archuleta County. A lot of areas now, with so many people going into recreation areas, they're ruining roads. They drive on roads in the winter and deep ruts. Nobody has the money to really repair these roads. So we're trying to see if we can get special funding for counties so that they're not spending county money when statewide people are using these in state-owned areas, so that we can keep the areas open to people, but the counties aren't going broke or closing off public lands to people. But it's just, we've had testimony from some county commissioners that this is a really, it's harmful, it's dangerous to have these huge ruts in roads, but it's also really, really expensive to fix everything. So, so they're trying to find a match between. And again, we have to find the perfect funding source for that too. So we found one and then it wasn't perfect. So we have to go to plan B or C or whatever number we're on now, but we're working on it. So that's kind of what I'm doing this year.
Great. Well, thank you guys.
Yay.
So while we sort out. Okay, all right, we've got, it looks like quite a healthy number of questions. Before we start, I want you, Representative MacLachlan in particular mentioned a term that I think most of us think we know what it means.
Okay.
But talk about the fiscal note and maybe just in the context of, so there's a handout that we put together that we took from actually the state legislature's website that talks about how a bill, the life of a bill.
Okay. Or the
and-
death.
Or, or the death, right?
Sometimes
But maybe talk a little bit about the fiscal note and just kind of where the process of that, because I know you've talked about passing things to the Senate and the Senate comes back to the House and so on. So
Yeah. I'll start off and you jump in whenever you need to. So we come up with an idea for a bill. Sometimes it's through a lobbyist, sometimes it's through community members. Somebody will say, what about this? And so you get these ideas for bill and we send it to a drafter. Thank goodness we don't have to write these bills. As an English teacher, they really conflict with my way of writing. But the drafter will write the draft of the bill. And then you meet with a lot of stakeholders to see what works on the bill, what doesn't work. We try to meet with people who agree with it, who don't agree with it. That stakeholder process is pretty lengthy. It should be pretty lengthy. We have a few people this year who don't think they need to do it. So that messes up things a little bit. So we have to kind of kill their bills. But so we try to get as many voices in about the bill as we possibly can. And then we send it on and they send that bill after everybody agrees on it to our fiscal analyst. And every department has fiscal analysts who know it really well. For instance, in education, they have contacts with higher ed, all the people in education to see, who spends the money, Colorado Department of Education. And they go through everything in the bill and figure out how much this will cost. Sometimes it's how much it'll cost the state. They will tell you if it goes over the tabor and they will demand a refund. Sometimes there's no fiscal note from it, but that's only at the state. The money has to come from a county or a school district or something like that. So there's a fiscal note, but they are not required to say how much that fiscal note is. So we have to read those notes very carefully to make sure that we're not passing this great bill that there's no cost to the state, but the schools are going to have to pay a lot of money on it. So there's a balance in there. And the fiscal note analysts will bring this to you. And if you think it's too high or you don't think it's accurate, you discuss it with them and they can go adjust. You might go and make some amendments to your bill, which is what I was telling you I did on that first one, that we cut 5 million out. So we kind of try to match it up. We don't have that much money to play with. And every time you do a $5 million bill out there, it takes it away from somebody else who could probably use the $5 million. So you just have to, there's a big balancing act that we have to do. And so the fiscal note tells you a little bit of the history of the bill. It tells you what the bill does. It tells you how much, where the money is going to come from. It tells you who it affects. They're pretty intense and they're pretty, it's a good source of information. And those are all online. For those of you who follow these bills online, they're all available online. So you can always see what it is. And you have to be careful sometimes because they don't always change the fiscal note right away if there are amendments to the bill. So you have to make sure that you see an amended version. You might be looking at the first bill where they cut out a whole bunch of money out of it. So make sure when you read it to look at the amended. And then our bills will go through a committee or two in the House. And then they might, if they have a fiscal note with them, they have to go to appropriations, and the appropriations and finance committees determine whether we have the money, whether it's a good use of our money. Oftentimes you can have it killed right there in appropriations. So if it gets through those committees, then we have second readings in the House. And that's when they tell everybody in the legislature about what the bill is about. And they can make amendments on the floor. Sometimes these go on for hours and hours and hours because people, this is really for a lot of people the first time they get to hear about this bill. And so, so they make amendments and they argue and debate, and it's all on the floor. It's all public, and that's on. You can watch that go on the website as well. So if you want to watch those conversations, you can watch those. Sometimes I wouldn't advise it, but most of the time they're pretty interesting, but sometimes it's like, really? And And then if it passes that, we vote on those, but that's not a recorded vote. So you won't be able to see how anybody actually votes on those. We have a recorded vote for the committee, and then we have a recorded vote for the third reading. After the second reading goes through, it comes back and they have a third reading. And that's when we vote yes or no. There's no maybe or check back with me. You vote yes or no on it.
And it's recorded.
Yeah, and that one is recorded and they will be able to say. In the House, we have electronic buttons that we push and you can see a big board of how everybody's voted. And in the Senate, they do it orally. So I don't know how you do it without the board, but
We do it. It's if you don't cast a vote, it's presumptive that you're a yes. So when a recorded vote happens on third reading, the president will ask, are there any no votes? And those that want to be recorded as a no vote, raise their hand. And then he will identify you as being recorded as a no vote. But by default, if you're not there, you're a yes vote.
so watch your attendance if you're in the Senate. I bet that happens.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you,
But
people go to the
we're pretty
bathroom.
good about being there for
Yeah.
third reading.
so, what's that? Yeah. We're there. So, yep. Especially on third readings, because you know you're voting. And it always amazes me that there's one person who hasn't voted and like, where are they? And they're out in the hall talking to people. It's like, so yeah, I agree with you totally on that one. Be there. We're getting paid the big bucks, but we're also here to represent you. So be there. And so after all that goes through, if it passes through the House, then it starts all over in the Senate. And the Senate has their committees, one or two committees that they go to. They also do seconds and then they do thirds. The only thing that changes then is that if on thirds in the other House, whether it starts in the House and this happens in the Senate, if they make an amendment on it, they have to bring it back to the House sponsors to see if they agree or disagree with the amendment that the Senate has made. So they can't have one House just throwing in stuff that they like and, you know, they don't have to tell anybody about it. You know, lots of secrets are passed, that they try to pass them that way. And so we've had a few this week. They started in the House, they went through the Senate with some amendments, they've come back, and then the House sponsors have to get up in front and say, there's been an amendment made, here's what it does, we agree, we disagree. If they disagree, they can go into a committee and hash it out. If they can't come to an agreement, the bill dies. But if they can come to an agreement and everybody can go back and forth and understand what the amendments do, then the bill passes and then it goes to the governor. And sometimes he tells us and sometimes he forgets if he's going to veto your bill or not. He means to, but sometimes it's, I haven't had any vetoed yet, but there will be one somewhere. So people are always surprised every year or so. But then the governor, you know, during this first part of the session, he does them all in the Capitol. And then when they're toward the end of the session, that's when he goes around the state and signs bills for different legislators about ones that were passed later in the session. Does that kind of cover things? What do you have
Just
to add?
a
Yeah.
couple of notes to add to it around the fiscal note and analyst that goes on. They have to make a lot of assumptions and a lot of times they'll reach out to similar programs maybe that happen in other states. They also engage with all the impacted departments. So sometimes it's Department of Human Services or CDPHE, and then there can be a variety of departments that are impacted and they give feedback. And so it gets rather nuanced and complicated in that analysis. And what they can't do is assume, like I have a bill, the community health workers, there's an assumption that these folks are going to save us money by keeping people having a navigator or somebody help people, particularly Medicaid eligible folks, maneuver through the system can save the state money. But the fiscal analyst doesn't get to incorporate potential cost savings. So that it's kind of an odd process, but we all live with it. And I actually find this really ironic. We're having this conversation I didn't mention, but my wife is here with me today. She's in 100 days, we'll be married 40 years. And she is ironic. This exact conversation she just went through 2 days ago to give to a women's group in Alamosa.
Okay.
And that's just ironic to go. She just went through this and was asking me the same kind of questions. How does a bill get started? And anyway, it was kind of fun. So thanks to my wife, Kathy, for being here with me today.
Yay.
Well, congratulations on your upcoming anniversary.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a number of questions, and Les, do you think that there's any sort of, I don't know, shenanigans going on? Basically, what we've done is taken all of the questions that have been submitted, both in the room and some questions that we received in advance from folks in Montezuma and Montrose, and kind of put them in like categories of topic. We won't necessarily ask every question if some questions have been repeated or can get captured in another question. So anyway, we're going to start with the first question. And this is this sort of general category of law enforcement, mental health, drugs, which you raised, Senator. So the question is, given limited resources in dealing with drug use and abuse, should we emphasize and fund law enforcement or mental health services? And I'll ask you both to just try to keep your answers to about 2 minutes each, please.
Well, I don't think it's an either or. Last year was a sponsor of a bill to fund within district attorneys diversion funding to keep folks that need. Look, I also serve on something called the longest titled committee that we have at the legislature. Treatment of people with behavioral health issues in the criminal justice system. So it opened my eyes again to how the connectivity between behavioral health, the mental health status of our state, and the criminal justice system. And too many folks are wrapped up in the criminal justice system that need help in the behavioral health space. So last year we funded, I can't remember, $1.5 million to help district attorneys where folks were qualified. And you have to account for victims' rights in this evaluation as well, but get them the help in a diversion program pre-trial. So maybe you can structure something to keep folks out of the criminal justice system. And again, I don't think it's an either or. I think we got to figure out how to be very thoughtful that you can do both at the same time.
I would absolutely agree with that. We shouldn't have to choose between them. Durango has a program that is copied in a lot of areas around the state. Durango police have teams that go out, and they have a police officer with a social worker, and they have a list of all the people in the jurisdiction who have struggled with some kind of mental health issue, and they go and check with them regularly. So these people know that somebody's watching them. If a call comes in, the police officer doesn't go out with all the other police. It's just the work that is done with the social worker. And it's been a really successful program here and in other parts of the state that the police isn't trying to be the social worker and the social worker isn't trying to be the police. They go together as a team. And it's been a really successful program, but we fund both of them. And I think it's money well spent because sometimes people are in trouble with the police and it's because of mental health issues. It's not that they're horrible people. They're just having an issue at that point in time. And we need to address that instead of throwing them in jail where nobody is certified really to address mental health issues. So let's get them before they end up going to jail. And the checking in is really beneficial because everybody knows that they're being checked on regularly and what issues do you have. And if somebody makes a call in, they go, I know this guy, I'll take it. And they know the people already involved. So I think it's good.
And I routinely capture behavioral health and substance use disorders in the same kind of terminology, but so many folks, again, in the criminal justice system are really challenged around substance use disorders. And again, trying to get folks the help that they desperately need. Maybe we can strike a better balance than where we're at today.
Yeah. We're going to shift gears. So this is in the realm of education and funding. So this question says, we have a very large amount of our state revenue that goes towards school and education legislation, and yet we still have very low CMAS scores. In your opinion, rather than money, what more can we do for our children to improve students' math, language, arts, and reading proficiency? And we'll start with you, Representative MacLachlan.
Thank you.
Oh, I defer. Actually, I'm working on a bill right now for math scores in particular. We have a program that's called the READ program, and it is for students, mostly younger students, to get their reading going. And teachers are taught the science of reading and how to get kids going. And the scores are doing pretty well from there with our younger children. I'm doing one for math that is not the READ Act, but it's addressing students who particularly have gone through COVID and they've just missed a couple of years of math. And they are really struggling in like the 4th grade because they missed the 2nd and 3rd grade of math. It was online. There was nobody at home to help them. So this bill, which is coming out on Tuesday, actually, it's going to help. It's going to do multiple things. It's all voluntary. We're going to train teachers inside. We're going to train the trainers. We're going to train teachers and parents on how to help their kids with their math if they're home, so that they get, more people. We're training like Boys and Girls Club members for kids to go after school. They may not get it all in class, but they can go after school and get help. So we're doing a whole bunch of people that have contact with kids who could really help them with their math scores. We're trying to get them to catch up on what they've missed and also what they are currently learning in class now, so that next year they will be able to go and start their math on target where they're supposed to be. Math is a little different. I taught English for a long time, and math is a little different. If you don't get year 1 of math, year 2 is really hard, and everybody tells you you're stupid. And it's not that you're stupid, it's just that you didn't get the building block for it. And then by the time 3 rolls around, if you haven't had a good 1 and 2, you're lost and you hate math forever, and you don't ever want to learn it. And so the teacher who has 30 kids in the class, and you're the one who constantly raises your hand, you won't raise your hand anymore. You just sit in the back and you'll probably fail the class. So this is to help all the kids in math. We saw during COVID or after COVID that math scores went down. And so we decided to just really hone in and focus on math alone, and to make sure that kids are getting really good one-on-one math, and lots of people are there to help them. So maybe it's the teacher, but if they're overwhelmed, there will be after-school programs. There's, parents we're going to help out so they can help them at home. I think a lot of what happened during COVID is the teachers giving math online, which is a pretty hard way to do math, but the parents weren't there to listen to the lesson. They didn't know how to help the kids. And so everybody kind of fell down this rabbit hole of failing math. And so we're really going to try to help bring this back. And I'm running it with, 2 Republicans and another Democrat, and we're really focusing on getting kids in Colorado back with their math skills. But I think it's really good. And we've had a lot of expert help and a lot of proven tutoring that works. So we're using science-based and evidence-based materials to help the kids out with their math skills.
And without really being too cliche in responses, I wished I knew what the real answer was to solve really a lack of the right outcomes we need in K through 12. But from this, the first standpoint is by Constitution, we've dedicated a certain amount of funding to K through 12, and historically, the legislature doesn't fund it. There's something called a budget stabilization factor, the BS factor, that got as high as almost $1 billion, with an abundance of flow of federal dollars over the last couple of years. I think it's down to about $300 million now is what was supposed to go to K through 12 education, that was really used to backfill, again, stabilize the budget. So I've been pretty vocal about making sure we shouldn't have a budget stabilization factor. We shouldn't be balancing the state's budget on the back of K through 12 education. But I can't say with great confidence that just adding more money is going to produce better outcomes, but you at least ought to start with what the electorate told us we were supposed to do, was funded at this level. I've always been an advocate of school choice, but I'm also an advocate. I need my public school system to succeed. Most of the counties that I represent don't have many alternatives besides the public system. And I'm a product of the public school system, great support at home. But I'm really adamant about trying to make sure we fund it appropriately and we support the public education system. My mom, she's deceased. She was a first grade school teacher. My sister's a 7th grade science teacher. My daughter-in-law is a 6th grade science teacher. So I don't lack opportunities to get an earful about how the education system isn't quite functioning like it should be. So it's another one of those areas kind of similarly to the healthcare system that I don't have great experience there, but trying to be better educated, informed, and make really good choices when it comes to our education system here, because we need to improve without a doubt.
So both of you actually talked a little bit about the complication of how education and other things are funded. And that's actually the second part of this person's question. So, you know, one of the things they say in their question is, I hear many legislators suggest that Tabor is directly linked to education funding. So my question would be, is that true? But before you answer that, you know, if it can come from any place in the budget, what kind of trade-offs do we need to make in order to fund education? Where would funding come from?
I'll take a first stab at it and look, as a conservative Republican, I believe Tabor has done exactly what the constituency asked it to do. And it affords an avenue to go, if you want to raise more taxes than the Tabor limit is there, make the case to the electorate that we are good stewards of that resource, and you can ask for more tax dollars. Aside from that, if we have this budget stabilization factor, I just look back and go over the last 10 years, the growth of our state government and 168 new programs and offices and entities to go, I think it affords an opportunity to look back and go, is there real value in doing that versus funding education and eliminating the budget stabilization factor? I just think we just have to be better stewards of what we have. And if you can demonstrate to the electorate that we are much better stewards of that resource, I don't have any hesitancy or reluctance at all to go back to the voters and say, we want more money for roads, we want more money for K through 12, or we want more money for higher ed. I don't want to get off in this really rat hole about, I'm on Capital Development Committee, which oversees how the state maintains, I don't know what the number is, billions of dollars of assets, schools, the correction facility system, a number of places. And we really do a disservice. We don't take care of the assets that we own now. And that was really frustrating for me to sit through that process. And I'm getting way off the beaten path, but I look at, and look, I'm a little biased. I live in Alamosa, so Adams State University kind of gets a lot of attention from me. But when they make requests for capital dollars to help with the assets that the state of Colorado owns, there's a facility on the campus of Adams State that the state architect scores all these assets, the condition, the facility condition index of every asset we own. You buy a new asset, that condition index score is 100. And over time, you know, it starts to deteriorate and you need to invest in it to keep it up. And the objective is to try to keep assets at I think it's a 65 or 70. There's a facility on Adams State, the maintenance facility, that has a facility condition index score of 14. It's the lowest scored facility that the state owns, and it's been that way for years. And again, it all ties into how we prioritize spending. How do we justify we're good stewards of the resource of the state of Colorado? And sorry, I got off on K through 12 education, but it is all tied together. Routinely, when we do the budget, we're all tasked with trying to prioritize where you're gonna apply those resources.
So that's kind of the core of the question, like how do you make those trade-offs, and what would you trade to fund education?
And I think that's a huge question. What do you trade? I try to substitute on different committee hearings so I can understand where, you know, what's happening in the state that way when you have to listen, you know, health services. I'm not on the committee, but I like to go in and participate in it. Every one of them this year says, boy, if we had more money, what would we do? If we had more money for mental health, what could we do with that money? If we had more money for the prison system, we try very hard as the legislature not to create laws that send more people to prison, but they had 300 beds short of what they needed this year in the state. What do we do with that? Prison guards are committing suicide because they're overworked and underpaid there. So there's somewhere we could put money. Wildfires, we need more money to prevent wildfires. Higher education is woefully underfunded. If we want our kids to have affordable college and not get out with great debt, it used to be that the state paid quite a bit for in-state tuition. They're barely paying anything now. And so kids want to go to college and they end up getting in debt that it used to be what didn't exist. Everybody needs the money, but we have a limited pot. So it's a really hard decision where to take that money. And we're always accused, you never look at everything. We look at every single penny that's in there. In my education committee, we try very hard not to pass anything that costs money, because that is taking money from something else. If you pass a big bill for $6 million, that's $6 million that somebody else doesn't get. So there's a lot of choices to make, and they might be great bills, but they're really expensive bills. We need to do something with water in Colorado again. How do we do that without, without spending money in some cases? My landfills bill, we should be helping these communities that their water is getting polluted because of a landfill and it's not the county's fault. How do we do this and make sure that they get reparations for for the bad water that they're getting, that they get help with stuff? You have to take that money from something else. And we have a limited pot. We passed in Colorado a bill last year to lower income taxes, which is great, but it also makes that pot smaller. So Tabor is not about education, but it's all about taxes. And guess what funds education? Taxes. We have had numerous ballot issues up since I've been in office about transportation. How do we fund that? Would everybody like to vote on raising a little bit of money for transportation, and they die? We've had 3 about education. They all die. So I think people are doing what they can and asking the voters for help. But if the voters say no, and they're not coming up with any better ideas about where this money comes from, we have to do something. We would probably have enough money right now to pay off the budget stabilization factor, but you'd have to deplete a lot of other funding, and then you have to keep that money going every single year. You can't just pay it off and then go, okay, everybody got a pay raise this year, and we're going to take it back because we don't have enough money to keep paying that money. We have to make sure that when we add and subtract, I guess, from the budget stabilization factor, that we can keep that money in the budget every year. And not as easy as it sounds. It's a really tough choices that we have to make. But it's in statute, it's the law, Constitution, so we have to do it. But everybody wants something for their particular idea in their particular department. And it's a battle every time. And people are losing and people are winning. And right now there's probably more people losing than winning. But that's what Colorado looks like right now in a lot of ways.
So way to sell being a senator.
I know. Can't wait to run for office.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
So I think an area of great concern across the state and certainly in these districts is affordable housing. So just a couple highlights maybe of things that the state's working on or bills that you're seeing that might address the housing situation.
We don't lack for challenges in this state, whether it's funding schools or affordable housing. And again, I wish there was a really clear path forward. What I routinely try to focus on is really challenging legislation that really makes housing less affordable in this state, where people have great intentions about improvement in climate, usually associated with climate change. And some of those kind of requirements for counties, I take, for example, last year, there was a bill that would require every governing body that has a set of codes and regulations, land use regulations. If you amend those, if you update those land use regulations, you have to adopt the international, you have to adopt and enforce the International Energy Conservation Code. Well, I just said, look, I appreciate what we're trying to accomplish, but you have to be mindful of what that does to the cost of housing. And for me, again, particularly in rural Colorado, where I don't know how much impact adopting the International Energy Conservation Code is going to have in Alamosa, where we don't build a lot anyway. If you're going to build now and add $70,000 to the cost of a 1,700 square foot house, you make it less affordable. So I don't want to highlight just the negative, because on the other side of the spectrum last year was active on a bill to create a middle income housing affordability. I forgot what the name of it was, but it was an avenue to create a private, like nearly like a public-private partnership where developers could have access to municipal bonds, lower tax rate bonds, if they're focused on, with county approval, crafting housing for the mid-range income folks. So there's already programs for low income to try to capture or create affordable housing. People on the upper end of the scale really don't need much help, but teachers and firefighters and first responders kind of fit in that almost no man's land. So we're trying to get that set up and established. We haven't issued the first set of bonds for that, but the board is in place. It's taken a year. And again, it's set up as a pilot project to see, and it was intended, the language says you're going to do 12 of these pilot programs in rural Colorado. The board hasn't yet identified where they want to do them, but it's a small step in an effort again to try to create an opportunity in rural Colorado, more affordable housing. But again, this is something, if I knew how to solve this problem, I wouldn't be sitting here at the League of Women Voters in Durango talking about it. I'd be doing it. I don't know if Barb has some other ideas or
not much more. The state gave with the COVID money, $430 million last year. We set aside for housing in the state, and a lot of it was for local control. We have things like revolving loan, so that you borrow the money to do the house, you pay it back, and that money goes to the next person who needs the money. So it's one chunk of money that just keeps getting reused. Our needs in Bayfield are different than the needs in Denver. So I'm not sure if Denver should be telling us what we need to do with local control, or, how to build houses, but we need to do something. The Roost that's down where the old Holiday Inn was, I was told that it was going to be affordable housing, but it's like $1,800 a month for a studio apartment. And then I heard all these other people in Durango decided to raise their rents to match that one. That did nothing for local control. I mean, for affordable housing, when everybody is, going up. We do need more buildings. We need more housing. But I'm not sure we need to tell teachers that they need to have a family in a studio apartment so that they can afford it, or that our firefighters and police, if you live in substandard housing, you can afford to live here. And they're professionals. We should not be doing that to anybody. So we do have to figure out how to spend the money locally, what decisions need to be made here, who has, the land is really expensive, the building materials are very expensive if they can even get here. But there's so much to look at with this, and nobody can say that it's not an issue. When I was knocking doors, that was absolutely the biggest issue that came up, is what about affordable housing? What about workforce housing? We have ski areas, we have tourism. People need to live here if they're going to be doing this, and not many people want to live 32 to a house just to make sure that they can pay, they can work in a place that doesn't pay enough. So I don't know, this issue came up years ago when I was first running, and my thought then was, should the government really be getting involved in affordable housing? But who does get involved in affordable housing? If it's a community and we leave it up to these people who built this place that's really an expensive studio apartment, is that what we need to do? Or do we need to do something that is going on with the other one on 160? I love that our mobile home park owners were able to buy their places and they now have an affordable place to live. That was really great legislation that came through, and the people there are so happy because they get to own their own home for the first time ever. They never thought they'd be able to. They've been living there for years, generations even. So I would be happy to hear solutions for all this, how we use local control to do what we need to do here. How do you do it without the government help? If you can do that, get $430 million, good for you. That's a big bake sale you're going to have. But we need to do something, and we need to do it together. And I think our community needs to work together to say this is an important issue for everybody. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are or what you have. If we're going to give a local control, let's be the locals that control this and what we can do with it. So, I mean, I agree. You said, yeah, get the government out of it, but who else pays? Who else does this? Yeah, and I'm not sure.
Legislation out of nowhere is really urgent.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, you guys are talking about anytime a county has to update their regulations, they have to adopt this new climate control crowd. Okay,
Yeah.
so again, that's gonna add more.
It is, absolutely.
Probably that's getting already for it.
I don't disagree with you at all.
Okay,
And so we
so
do
you
have to
work
watch
on-
those bills that make housing more expensive than what they should be. Okay, I'm totally with you on that. And then, I mean, it's a balance that we have to take. How do we take care of our climate and where we live and make affordable housing and get good transportation in so people don't need to drive everywhere, and we have to build big parking lots for every place that they live because everybody has 2 or 3 cars. How do we work all these things in together? There's a lot to think about on it.
So that's a good segue to a couple of questions.
I'm
Talking
mastering
about
segue today,
climate,
so yeah.
right? I think, Senator, you had actually mentioned one of the bills, the agricultural producers' use of agrivoltaics.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? And specifically, the question is, how will that help reduce carbon emissions and grow jobs in Colorado?
12 months ago, I probably didn't even know what agrivoltaics was, but I managed the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. That basin over Wolf Creek Pass has about 500,000 acres of irrigated land. So it's also it's really this unique place. It's the driest spot in Colorado. Alamos is 7 inches of precipitation, and then the top of Wolf Creek Pass, 70 miles away, is some of the wettest part of the state. Really weird place to live, but we really struggle with a water security issue where our demand exceeds our supply. And you can see that we don't have a Lake Mead or a Lake Powell, but we do have a pretty prolific aquifer system that we monitor and really report on a monthly basis the change. And our aquifer system that you can't see closely mimics what you see in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. It's just declining. So we're really tasked with, and uniquely by statute, nobody else in Colorado, and up until recently, nobody else in the Western US has a statutory requirement to create and maintain a sustainable aquifer system. Mostly because our aquifer is really unique. It responds really well to more recharge or less pumping. Not like the Ogallala aquifer out in the plains. It just is, people out there manage that. How do you manage that aquifer to extinction? How do they get 50 years or 100 years? So we have a statutory requirement to create and maintain a sustainable aquifer system. So with about 500,000 irrigated acres, there's limits on what we can do. We can be more efficient with water, but look, we've transitioned from mostly flood irrigation to dominated by center pivot sprinkler systems, what I do. And there's room to gain some efficiency there, but that's not going to solve our problem. We're raising some different crops I raise alfalfa, the most water consumptive use crop we can raise. But this year, my son and I raised hemp for fiber, not for CBD oil, not for the seed, just raise it for fiber. I grew it on half the water as my alfalfa crop. But ultimately, there's going to be less irrigated acres in the San Luis Valley. Mother Nature will dictate this and how effective we are, in some of these other areas. But if the next 20 years look like the last 20 years, and we don't do anything different, there's probably 100,000 acres that doesn't have a water supply. And then now you're in the driest spot of the state. So there aren't a lot of options. I'd always, for the last 6 or 8 years, been mindful of what do you do with 10,000 or 50,000 historically productive irrigated acres that don't have a water supply going forward, and was always interested in this space about renewable energy, solar, to go. The San Luis Valley is like the premier place for solar generation in Colorado and largely in the whole Western US. It's 8,000 foot of elevation. It's flat. I referenced we only get 7 inches of precipitation, so you don't have to go shovel the snow off of solar panels. And so I've always been interested in this conversation about can we transition, productive ground and not wreck our communities, our economies, and our cultures with solar panels in the commercial scale solar operations in the San Luis Valley. I really don't want to see 100,000 acres of solar panels, but somewhere there's a balance, 10, 15, 20,000. And then it gets off in another discussion. There's a infrastructure challenge. We don't have transmission capacity to do that, but it got me started in this space. All right, if we're going to take some amount of productive agriculture out of production, and if solar is going to fill that spot, I got introduced a year and a half ago to this conversation about agrovoltaics, where people are experimenting with how do you incorporate commercial scale solar operations on productive agriculture, and not, you don't have to go in and either gravel the whole 100 acres, or you don't have to spray the weeds. Maybe there's a way to incorporate solar and agriculture in the same space. So last summer, I got to go tour a place in Longmont called Jack Solar Garden. Byron, I couldn't tell you his last name, but what a great opportunity to see where he on his own took on a very small scale 7-acre farm that he had and incorporated solar, and very intentionally how he constructed the solar, spreading the panels out, lifting them up, creating some opportunities to understand, can you still raise some crops somehow underneath those solar panels? Can you graze? He was grazing cattle under part of it. And look, he's pretty unique because he sits right there in Boulder County. And I don't know, there was 1 million people live within 50 miles of it. So people were really interested. They want to go do a garden plot underneath solar panels. And it was really pretty cool. They were raising raspberries under one of them, and like raspberries out in the full sun. And so when I'm there, you get to go pick raspberries off of those plants underneath the solar panels, and they're distinctly different. Now, maybe it just wasn't the solar panels, but they were sweeter. They were better than the raspberries we were picking and eating outside of the solar panels. They create a bit of a microclimate underneath them. And anyway, it got me interested in expanding this conversation and seeing about people have reported to me across the United States, if we're going to replace all the carbon generation electricity that happens across the United States, there was a reference to 10 million acres of solar panels. What in the world do you do with 10 million acres of, and how do you not impact that? And because they're going to be, out predominantly in agricultural spaces. So it really sparked an interest in me in trying to learn more about what opportunities there might be to better understand what the connectivity between agriculture and solar generation is. What does this state want to do in that space? Like from a regulatory perspective, or I would more prefer pursuing incentive. What incentives might we want to offer, again, to be in communities and not just completely disrupt that agricultural base that most of us depend on and rely on. So the bill got introduced. There are so many people interested in this, and it had beyond just an agrivoltaics perspective. There's something called aquavoltaics and putting solar panels over water bodies. And it also included a space about what agricultural's role in emissions reductions through voluntary carbon sequestration opportunities. And do we want to stand something up, a program like that? It's called, carbon banks. Other states are doing it. Do we want to consider that? And what would that look like to ag producers in the state of Colorado?
Thanks. So there's a linkage, I think, that we might all appreciate between what we've been talking about in terms of climate, water, and I'm going to ask a question about health because they are connected. So this is maybe a quick yes or no. And I want to try to get to a couple more questions. I've got 25 after, so. So the question is, do you believe that everyone should be able to get the health care they need, regardless of how much money they have?
Yes.
Seems simple enough. Yes, I don't know how you do it, but
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. We don't know how.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these seem like, of course, it would be something we would all agree, and then it becomes more complicated in terms
Details,
of how
yeah.
do we do that? I will say that I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions, and those that we're not going to get to, which are several, we will forward to you all.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
So that you have those and have an opportunity to respond. So this one has to do with voting, something near and dear to the heart of the League of Women Voters. So the question is, would you sponsor a bill to remove Dominion, et cetera, voting machines and return to paper ballots and that are hand counted?
I'll take the first stab at that. I wouldn't introduce a bill like that. I also serve, one of the other committees I serve in is the Bipartisan Election Advisory Commission. So it affords me the opportunity to be incrementally more involved and engaged in the voting process in the state and go tour voting centers and deal with the Secretary of State's office. And I'm abundantly confident that the system that we use works. I do think there are opportunities, you know, in voter rolls, making sure voter rolls are accurate, making sure there isn't malfeasance in collecting ballots and manipulating ballots. But the system, once the ballot arrives at voting centers, I don't have hesitation to say I'm confident that the system works. Forgot where I was going with that. Let Barb go, and I'll finish my thought when it comes back to me.
I would also say, no, I would not run that. I've spoken often with Democrat and Republican clerks about what happens behind the scenes, and I have faith in the system.
Oh, I know what I was going to add was
Yeah, I had to-
the mail-in ballot system, for all of its potential failures. I welcome that opportunity to be able to sit down with my father-in-law, with anybody that has questions. The ballot continues at times to get even more complicated, and that affording that opportunity to engage and talk with the ballot, not just waiting to, you know, help that individual show up and vote. It's just something we've transitioned to over years. It would be really hard to go back to just in-person voting. Even that system has its failures and flaws in it. I'm comfortable with where we're at.
Thank you. And I know that our county clerk is here, and so I'm going to do a little pitch, and not to throw our clerk a curveball, but I do know that clerks across the state, and certainly ours does as well, welcomes people to come and visit and take a tour of the voting process to see for themselves how that actually works. So,
Even afterwards, the risk limiting audits that
Yeah.
take place, I was fortunate enough to be part of one of those in Arapahoe County this year. And again, it just helps build confidence from my perspective that the system does. I believe the system works.
Yeah.
I do.
So thank you very much. All right, so we are really nearly out of time. And so I want to have one last question. And again, the questions that we did not get to, we will compile those and forward those to both of you. So very quickly, please suggest how people living in rural Southwest Colorado, far away from Denver, can get reliable information about the legislature and actions going on in the legislature. And Representative MacLachlan, I'll ask you first.
The website is pretty good. I know a lot of you are on there. You can find it's ledge.com, I think, coleg.com. And it tells you can look at people by bill title, bill number, You can look at Senate and House, you can look up your legislators, you can see what's going on, you can see what everybody has done over the past years. You can tell how people have voted on there, where it is in committee, you can see the fiscal notes. There's a lot there. If there's a bill that's coming up and you want to sign up, one thing that COVID has done for us, it's really opened up Zoom. We always have Zoom participation in our committee hearings because people don't want to drive. Snow days, it's packed up there. We were in committee till 11 o'clock the other night, and all the people who had been in there, they all got to testify anyway, but they had all gone home. So it was great. We get to hear many, many more voices and many more rural voices, which I think is really important. So it's pretty easy to get on there. If you have questions, let me know, and I'm happy to kind of guide you to the way. But you know, we use it all the time as legislators to see who's running what bills and where they are. So I think it's a good one-stop shopping resource for everybody.
I think is it leg.colorado.gov?
It could be, yeah. It's one of those in there, but I guess mine is just kind of an instant open, so I forgot to look anymore. So yeah.
Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great resource.
Mhm.
And again, Barb touched on it with COVID, and the ability to testify remotely really comes in handy. And look, I encourage you, if you have an opportunity to testify in person, though, it's
Better.
it's just so much more impactful. But realizing you're 6 or 7 hours away from the Capitol, and particularly depending on how much testimony there is. Again, Thursday night, testimony was limited to 2 minutes. And so
A long drive.
I usually find ways, particularly folks that have driven a long ways, if the chair suspends the testimony at 2 minutes, I'll find a way to engage with them, to give them an opportunity to expand above and beyond what the 2 minutes is. So, and then, I mean, and just trying to, I'll take the opportunity to talk about reaching your legislators, and I'll highlight for me the value of people taking the time to craft an individual request or a question to me versus a chain letter type, form letter type of thing. I can tell you in the last couple of weeks with some of the bills in committees that I've seen, I've had over 2,000 emails a day.
And they're all the same.
I have a staff of one aide that is, she's young, she's energetic, but she doesn't have a great wealth of knowledge and experience to address every email that I get. And I just encourage you where you can, if you want to try to bring your perspective forward, take the time to try to write one individually. And I really do try to respond to everyone that has taken the time to do one individually. But I'm telling you, I'd left the Capitol yesterday at noon and drove to Alamosa, picked up my wife and drove here last night, had a bite to eat, went to bed. So I haven't looked at emails for a day. When I get home tonight, when I drive back to Alamosa later today, there'll be several hundred emails to try to process. And it's overwhelming, but I appreciate the feedback.
Great. Well, let's thank Senator Simpson and Representative MacLachlan.
And I want to thank the League of Women Voters and everybody who came out today. I know Saturdays probably have other things to be doing today, unbelievably, but thank you. I appreciate everybody joining us today.
Thank you all very much for coming. And just a reminder that the next activity that the League will be sponsoring is the candidate forum for these Durango City Council elections. That will be on March 15th at the Fort Lewis College Center for Innovation. It will also be a hybrid meeting, live and on Zoom. So thank you for attending. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. And you do have contact information for both Senator Simpson and Representative MacLachlan. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great weekend.
What's that?